Aaliyah Brooks learned very early that silence could be a shield. Every morning she walked through the tall glass doors of Ridgeway Preparatory School with her shoulders slightly hunched, not from weakness, but from caution, the kind that comes when you know the world is watching you and waiting for a reason to judge. Ridgeway wasn't just a school, it was a statement. Manicured lawns that looked more like golf courses, hallways lined with trophies that smelled faintly of polish and entitlement, students who wore confidence like it was stitched into their clothes. And then there was Aaliyah. She didn't stand out because she tried to. She stood out because she couldn't help it. She was a black girl in a school where most students had never worried about rent, never shared a bedroom, never heard the words, "We'll figure it out next month." She sat in the back row of her classes, not because she wasn't smart, but because being unseen felt safer than being noticed. Every day followed the same routine. She arrived early, chose the same seat, opened her notebook neatly, wrote in careful handwriting. Teachers liked her. They called her polite, quiet, focused. But none of them saw the tension in her hands when laughter broke out across the room, or the way her jaw tightened when conversations drifted toward family vacations, weekend homes, or what someone's dad did for a living. Because that's when it always started. At lunch, Aaliyah sat at the edge of the cafeteria, near the windows, not isolated, but not invited either. She listened more than she spoke. Designer sneakers squeaked past her table. Phones with cracked screens were rare, except hers. Conversations floated in the air like reminders of everything she wasn't supposed to belong to. One girl leaned over once and asked casually, "So, what does your dad do?" It wasn't a cruel question, not at first. Aaliyah paused. She knew how this usually went. "He's my stepdad," she said softly. "He works nights." The girl nodded, then smiled politely, and then she turned away. That should have been the end of it, but Ridgeway had a way of turning small details into rumors. By the end of the week, people weren't just asking about her dad, they were talking about him. Low voices, side glances, half smiles that didn't reach the eyes. "He's not even her real dad. I heard he doesn't have a real career. My mom said he probably couldn't even afford tuition." Aaliyah pretended not to hear, but words have weight, and hers were piling up inside her chest. At home, things were different. Their apartment wasn't big, but it was warm. Dinner was always ready, sometimes late, sometimes simple, but always made with care. And Marcus Hill, her stepfather, always asked the same question. "How was school today, baby?" Aaliyah always answered the same way. "Fine." She never told him about the whispers, never mentioned the looks, never repeated the jokes that cut a little deeper each day. Because Marcus already worked too hard. Because she had seen him come home exhausted, boots by the door, shoulders heavy from a job that paid just enough and demanded everything. Because she didn't want to be another burden. Marcus wasn't the kind of man who filled a room with noise. He moved quietly, spoke gently, listened more than he talked. He never raised his voice, never complained. When Aaliyah was younger, he learned how to braid her hair, badly at first, but with determination. He packed her lunches, helped with homework he didn't always understand, showed up to every school event until she asked him not to anymore, and he never once reminded her that he didn't have to. Back at Ridgeway, things escalated. One afternoon in English class, a group project was assigned. Aaliyah was placed with 3 students who barely acknowledged her presence. When the teacher walked away, one of them laughed and said, "Guess we'll do most of the work, right?" Another added, "Yeah, no offense, I just don't know what kind of help we'll get." Aaliyah swallowed. She finished her part early, submitted it quietly, said nothing. But something inside her shifted. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, she wondered something she'd never dared to think before. What if they're right? What if I don't belong here? And worse, What if my stepfather is the reason they see me this way? The thought made her chest ache, because loving him was the easiest thing she'd ever done. But defending that love, that was becoming harder every day. By the time Ridgway announced the upcoming Family Legacy Assembly, Aaliyah already knew one thing for sure. If people were cruel before, they were about to get worse. And this time, the target wouldn't just be her, it would be the man who raised her. By the time October arrived, the whispers at Ridgway Preparatory were no longer quiet. They followed Aaliyah Brooks down the hallways. They waited for her in classrooms. They sat beside her in the cafeteria, pretending to be jokes. And the worst part? They always came wrapped in laughter. Laughter that made cruelty sound harmless. Laughter that let people pretend they weren't doing anything wrong. It started one morning in the locker hallway. Aaliyah was reaching for her books when someone behind her said, just loud enough to be heard, "So, does your stepdad drive you to school in that old car?" A few kids laughed. Another voice added, "I heard he works nights. That usually means minimum wage." Aaliyah froze. She didn't turn around, didn't defend herself, didn't cry. She simply closed her locker and walked away, because reacting only made it worse. In history class, they were learning about legacy. The teacher asked students to share what their families were known for. "My dad's a surgeon. My mom's a partner at a law firm. My grandfather donated a wing to the hospital." Applause followed each answer. Then the teacher glanced at Aaliyah. "And you, Aaliyah?" Every head turned. Her throat tightened. "My stepfather works hard," she said quietly. "He takes care of our family." Silence. Then someone whispered, "That's not a legacy." Laughter broke out. The teacher tried to regain control, but the damage was done. Aaliyah didn't raise her head for the rest of the class. At lunch, the mocking became sharper. "Why do you even go here if your parents can't afford it? Must be awkward having a dad who isn't even blood. Does he even come to school events, or is he embarrassed?" They said it like curiosity, like jokes, but every word landed like a bruise. That afternoon, Aaliyah went to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall. She didn't cry loudly. She cried silently. Tears dripping onto her hands as she stared at her shoes, because she wasn't angry at them. She was angry at herself, for caring, for letting it hurt, for wishing just for a moment that things were different. At home, Marcus noticed immediately, not because she told him, but because he paid attention. She barely touched her food. Her answers were shorter. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You okay, baby?" he asked gently. "Just tired," she said. He nodded, but he didn't believe her. A few days later, Ridgway made an announcement. "Next Friday will be our annual Family Legacy Assembly. Parents and guardians are encouraged to attend." The room buzzed with excitement. Students whispered about outfits, about speeches, about showing off. Someone leaned toward Aaliyah and said, "So, is your stepdad coming?" Another added, "Or are you going to pretend you're sick that day?" Laughter exploded. Aaliyah's face burned. That night, she stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching Marcus wash dishes after a long shift. His hands were rough, scarred, hands that had held her bike steady when she learned to ride, hands that wiped her tears when her mother passed away. She swallowed hard. "I don't want you to come to the assembly," she said suddenly. The words surprised them both. Marcus turned slowly. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked softly. "No," she said quickly. "It's just everyone else's parents are different." He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded. "If that's what you want, I understand." But Aaliyah saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the quiet hurt, and she hated herself for it. At school, the teasing escalated into cruelty. A group chat started, memes, jokes, comments about her fake dad. Someone edited a photo of a janitor and labeled it Aaliyah's stepdad. She found out when someone showed her their phone, laughing. Her hands shook. She reported it. Nothing happened. By the time the assembly day approached, Aaliyah dreaded waking up. She avoided mirrors, avoided conversations, avoided hope, because hope only made the fall hurt more. She told herself one thing over and over: just get through it, just survive. What she didn't know was that the very man she tried to protect from embarrassment was about to change everything. The morning of the family legacy assembly arrived like a storm Aaliyah couldn't outrun. She woke up before her alarm, staring at the ceiling, her chest already tight. The day felt heavy, like something was waiting for her at school, something she couldn't avoid. She dressed slowly, chose the simplest outfit she owned, no bright colors, nothing that drew attention. She tied her hair back, looked at herself in the mirror, and whispered, "Just get through today." At breakfast, Marcus sat across from her, sipping coffee before another long shift. He watched her quietly, the way he always did. "You sure you don't want me to come?" he asked gently, one last time. Aaliyah hesitated. The words were right there, but fear was louder. "I'm sure," she said. Marcus nodded. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll be here when you get home." She grabbed her bag and left before the guilt could pull her back. The moment she stepped onto campus, she felt it. Eyes, whispers, anticipation. Students were dressed like they were attending a gala. Parents began arriving early, luxury cars lining the curb, polished shoes clicking against pavement. Aaliyah walked straight to her locker, head down. She didn't belong in this celebration of legacy. In first period, the teacher barely managed to teach. Everyone was distracted. A boy across the room leaned toward his friend and said loudly, "Can't wait to see everyone's parents today." Another voice added, "Yeah, except some people don't have anything to show." Aaliyah felt her stomach drop. By lunchtime, the tension had turned cruel. Someone stood on a chair and joked, "Announcement, if your dad isn't your real dad, this assembly might be awkward." Laughter erupted. Aaliyah stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She didn't yell, didn't cry. She just walked out. She locked herself in a bathroom stall again, hands shaking, breathing shallow. Why does this hurt so much? She wondered. Because it wasn't just about her classmates anymore. It was about Marcus, about the man who loved her without conditions, and the shame she felt for letting them make her doubt that love. The bell rang, assembly time. The gym doors opened, and students began filing in with their families. Aaliyah walked alone. She took a seat near the back bleachers, surrounded by proud smiles and camera flashes. Empty seat beside her. She kept her eyes on the floor. The principal stepped onto the stage. "Welcome to our family legacy assembly," he began. "A celebration of where we come from and who stands behind us." Each word felt like a punch. Students began walking up with their parents. Applause echoed. Aaliyah clapped politely, mechanically. Then she heard it, someone whisper behind her, "At least her dad didn't show up." That's when something inside her cracked. She stood, walked out of the gym. No one stopped her. Outside, she finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she leaned against the brick wall, trying to breathe. "I'm sorry," she whispered, to Marcus, to herself, to the little girl who once felt proud just holding his hand. She pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over his name. Then she pressed call. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Baby?" Her voice shook. "I shouldn't have asked you not to come. I was scared, and I let them make me feel ashamed." There was a pause. Then Marcus spoke. "I'll be there," he said. Inside the gym, the principal hesitated. A murmur spread as the doors at the back slowly opened, and someone walked in, calm, steady, with purpose. Aaliyah wiped her face and turned, and for the first time that day, she didn't feel alone.
Marcus Hill never liked talking about himself, not because he had nothing to say, but because the things that shaped him were never meant to impress anyone. While other people collected stories to tell at dinner parties, Marcus learned how to survive quietly. Long before Aaliyah ever called him Dad, Marcus learned what it meant to carry weight without showing it. He grew up in a neighborhood where sirens were more common than lullabies. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father left early. By the time Marcus was 16, he understood something most kids never have to learn. No one was coming to save him. So at 18, he enlisted, not for glory, not for medals, but for structure, for purpose, for a way out. The military taught Marcus discipline, but it also taught him loss. He learned how to wake up before dawn and fall asleep in boots, how to follow orders without asking why, how to keep moving even when fear screamed at him to stop. And overseas, he learned the hardest lesson of all, that bravery doesn't feel like confidence, it feels like terror and choosing to move forward anyway. There were nights Marcus never talked about, nights filled with noise and fire and decisions that could never be undone. Moments when he dragged wounded men through smoke, not knowing if the next step would be his last. Moments when he watched friends laugh one day and disappear the next. He came home with scars no one could see, and a silence he carried everywhere. When Marcus left the service, the world didn't clap. There were no parades, no easy transitions, just job applications that went unanswered, sleep that came in short, restless pieces. And then, unexpectedly, there was love. He met Aaliyah's mother when neither of them was looking for anything permanent. She was strong, tired, protective of her daughter. Marcus respected that. He never tried to replace anyone. He simply showed up. When Aaliyah was little, she called him Marcus. Then one day, without warning, she called him Dad. Marcus had to step into the bathroom to breathe, because some honors are too heavy for words. He packed lunches, attended parent-teacher conferences, sat in the front row at recitals where Aaliyah forgot her lines. When her mother passed away, Marcus didn't ask what to do. He stayed. He learned how to be gentle when grief made Aaliyah angry, how to be firm when fear made her reckless, how to love without conditions. And he never once reminded her that she wasn't his by blood, because love doesn't need proof. Marcus never wore his past, no framed photos, no stories, no medals on display. The medal he owned, the one hidden deep in a drawer, wasn't something he was proud of. It reminded him of who didn't come home, so he kept it away. At work, Marcus was just another man pulling long shifts, reliable, quiet, invisible. Co-workers knew he was disciplined, but not why. Neighbors saw him help carry groceries, but never asked where that strength came from. He blended into the background on purpose, because standing out had once meant danger. When Aaliyah asked him not to come to the assembly, Marcus didn't feel insulted. He felt afraid. Afraid that the world had taught her to be ashamed of him, and that hurt more than anything he'd ever endured. But still, he respected her choice, because love sometimes means stepping back. Until the phone rang. Aaliyah's voice, cracked, trembling, cut straight through him. "I was wrong," she said. "I need you." Marcus didn't hesitate. He opened the drawer, lifted the medal, held it in his hand for a long moment. Then he put it on, not for recognition, but for his daughter. Because Marcus Hill was never just a stepfather. He was a survivor, a protector, a man who had faced fire without flinching and still chose kindness.
The gymnasium at Ridgeway Preparatory had never been this loud. Cameras clicked, parents whispered, students laughed and leaned into each other, pointing out suits, dresses, jewelry. It felt more like a celebration of status than a school event. Aaliyah sat frozen in her seat, fingers clenched in her lap, heart racing. She kept glancing at the double doors at the back of the gym, waiting. The principal continued speaking. "Today, we honor the families who shaped us through success, sacrifice, and legacy. Applause filled the room, but Aaliyah barely heard it. Her eyes stayed locked on the doors. Then they opened. Slowly. No announcement, no spotlight. Just one man stepping inside. Marcus Hill. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate. He walked with a calm confidence that came from a lifetime of choosing control over chaos. Simple dark suit, polished shoes, and around his neck, a medal. Small, subtle, heavy. At first, no one noticed. He blended the way he always did. But then, someone saw the ribbon. A pause rippled through the room. Whispers replaced laughter. What is that? Is that a military medal? Wait, that's not just any medal. The principal's voice faltered. He stopped mid-sentence. Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but recognition. That was her dad. The man she asked to stay away, the man who came anyway. Marcus reached the aisle and paused. Students shifted in their seats. Parents stood straighter. A few teachers exchanged glances, recognition dawning. The principal stepped down from the stage, eyes fixed on Marcus's chest. He approached him slowly. "Sir," he said quietly, almost reverently, "may I ask?" Marcus nodded once. The principal swallowed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, voice unsteady, "this medal is awarded only for extraordinary acts of courage under fire." Gasps filled the room. This man carried wounded soldiers to safety while under direct enemy attack. He refused evacuation until every member of his unit was accounted for. The room stood, one by one. Students, parents, teachers. A standing ovation rose like a wave. Aaliyah stood too, hands trembling, tears streaming freely. She wasn't invisible anymore. Neither was Marcus. The students who had mocked her sat frozen, eyes down, faces pale. The jokes they'd thrown so easily now weighed on them like stones. Marcus didn't smile, didn't wave. He simply nodded politely, uncomfortable with attention. The principal handed him the microphone. Marcus paused, looked at Aaliyah, then spoke. "I didn't come here to be recognized," he said calmly. "I came because my daughter needed me." The gym went still. "She was afraid to let me stand beside her today," he continued, voice steady but gentle, "and that tells me something about the world we're building." He paused. "But I want her to know, and anyone else who needs to hear it, that no one should ever be ashamed of where they come from or who loves them." The room broke. Parents wiped their eyes. Teachers nodded silently. And Aaliyah? She had never felt prouder in her life. Marcus stepped back. The applause thundered again. But this time, it wasn't about status. It was about respect.
The applause didn't fade quickly. It lingered, echoing off the walls of the gymnasium, heavy, awkward, and filled with something no one expected to feel that morning: humility. Marcus Hill stood near the front row, hands folded, eyes lowered. He didn't soak in the attention. He endured it. Because that medal around his neck wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder. The principal waited until the noise settled, then cleared his throat. "For those who may not understand the significance," he said gently, "this medal is one of the highest honors awarded for bravery in combat." Screens behind the stage flickered to life. A single line appeared: "For extraordinary heroism at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." A murmur spread through the crowd. Parents leaned forward. Students stopped whispering. The principal continued. "Sergeant Marcus Hill was part of a unit ambushed during an overseas operation. Despite being injured, he carried multiple wounded soldiers to safety, returning again and again under fire." A hush fell. "This medal is not given lightly," the principal said. "In some years, it isn't given at all." Aaliyah felt her chest tighten. She knew Marcus worked hard. She knew he had served, but she never knew this. The weight of it pressed down on her and then lifted her, because now she understood. The camera cut to the audience. The students who once mocked her couldn't meet her eyes. One girl wiped tears from her face. Another stared at the floor, shame written clearly across her expression. The jokes they made suddenly felt small, cruel, unforgivable. Marcus was asked if he'd like to say more. He shook his head. "I don't like reliving it," he said quietly. "The men I carried, they're the real heroes." He paused. "And the ones who didn't make it, they're the reason I keep this hidden." Silence followed, not the awkward kind, the respectful kind. After the assembly ended, no one rushed for the doors. People stood in clusters, speaking in hushed voices. Aaliyah was approached, slowly, carefully. One of the boys who'd laughed the loudest stood in front of her. "I didn't know," he said. "I'm sorry." Others followed. Apologies weren't dramatic. They were uncomfortable and real. Outside, Marcus leaned against the railing, breathing deeply. Aaliyah walked up to him. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around him, tight, like she never wanted to let go. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Marcus closed his eyes. "So am I, of you." That afternoon, word spread. Parents talked. Teachers reflected. The administration quietly addressed the bullying, this time seriously, because now they couldn't ignore it. For the students of Ridgeway, something shifted. Legacy no longer meant wealth or status. It meant sacrifice, character, love. And for Aaliyah, the medal didn't change who Marcus was, but it changed how the world saw him. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.
The day after the assembly felt different. Not louder, not easier, just quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when everyone is trying to figure out what comes next. Aaliyah walked through the halls of Ridgeway Preparatory with her head held higher than she ever had before. Not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer owned her. Eyes followed her, but this time they didn't carry judgment. They carried something else: respect, regret. The first apology came before first period. A girl who had once laughed the loudest approached her locker, hands clasped tightly together. "I'm sorry," she said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know, and I should have never said those things." Aaliyah studied her face. She didn't rush to forgive. She didn't explode with anger either. She simply nodded. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. And that was enough. More apologies followed. In the hallway, in the cafeteria, in group chats that once mocked her name. Some messages were short, some were long, some felt sincere, others felt necessary. Aaliyah learned something important that day. An apology doesn't erase harm, but it can open the door to healing. In English class, something unexpected happened. The teacher paused mid-lesson and said, "Before we continue, I want to address something." The room stilled. "Yesterday showed us how easily we judge without knowing the full story," she said, "and how silence can sometimes be mistaken for weakness." Her eyes found Aaliyah. "But courage doesn't always shout," she continued. "Sometimes it waits." The class was quiet. For the first time, no one laughed. At lunch, Aaliyah didn't sit by the window. She sat at the center table, not because she wanted attention, but because she no longer feared it. A boy who had once shared the cruel meme cleared his throat. "I was wrong, and I'm trying to do better." Aaliyah looked around the table, and for the first time, she spoke. "You don't know what someone carries until you stop laughing long enough to listen," she said calmly. No one interrupted. Later that week, the administration announced a new student forum focused on respect, inclusion, and accountability. Aaliyah's name was on the list of speakers. Her hands shook when she saw it. She considered backing out, but Marcus's words echoed in her mind. "Your voice matters." The day of the forum, she stood at the podium,
heart racing, room full. She took a breath. For a long time, I thought staying quiet would protect me, but silence didn't stop the hurt, it just hid it. She spoke about assumptions, about family, about how love doesn't always look the way people expect it to. And when she finished, the room stood, not out of shock, but respect. That night, at home, Marcus listened quietly as she told him everything. When she finished, he smiled. You didn't just find your voice, you used it. Aaliyah smiled back. For the first time in a long time, she believed him.
Time didn't erase what happened at Ridgeway Preparatory, but it softened the sharp edges, and sometimes that's what healing looks like. In the weeks after the assembly, the school felt different. Not perfect, just more aware. Teachers watched more closely. Students spoke more carefully. Laughter didn't disappear, but it learned restraint. Aaliyah Brooks noticed the change in small moments. A smile held a second longer. A seat offered without hesitation. A silence that meant respect instead of exclusion. At home, Marcus returned to his routines. Early mornings, long shifts, quiet dinners. The medal went back into the drawer, not because he was ashamed, but because his worth had never depended on it. Aaliyah understood that now. One evening, she found Marcus on the couch, polishing his old boots. She sat beside him. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think legacy meant money or titles." Marcus nodded. "Most people do." She looked at him. "I think it means how you make people feel safe." Marcus smiled, small, proud. At school, Aaliyah started something new, a student-led group called Voices Unseen. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it gave students a place to speak without fear of being mocked for who stood behind them. The meetings were small at first, then they grew. Stories poured out about step-parents, grandparents, foster families, guardians who didn't share blood but shared love. Graduation day came faster than anyone expected. The gym filled once more. This time, Aaliyah wasn't in the back. She was on the stage. Her speech was last. She looked out over the crowd, parents, teachers, students, and she found Marcus, standing, quiet, proud. "When I first came to this school," she said, "I thought being strong meant being invisible." A murmur rippled through the room. "But I learned something," she continued. "Strength isn't about hiding who raised you." She paused. "It's about standing beside them, even when the world doesn't understand." Applause rose, slow, then powerful. After the ceremony, Aaliyah walked over to Marcus. She took his hand, and for the first time, she didn't let go. Years later, when people asked Aaliyah where she came from, she answered without hesitation. "I come from courage," she'd say, "from sacrifice, from a man who loved me when he didn't have to." And Marcus, he remained what he always was, a quiet hero, not because of the medal, but because of the life he built, one moment of love at a time. Never mock a child for the family that loves them. Never underestimate the quiet ones, and never forget, some legacies aren't inherited, they're earned. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this reminder today. And remember, respect costs nothing, but it changes everything.